gosh.
Just so everyone knows, some of the people who very generously spoke to me for this book are actually just logging in right now. So it's very exciting because some of them are in the UK, but they're able to log in during their morning. So I'm just getting very excitable looking at everyone's tiny faces.
I wonder, Kate, if we've got everybody here.
I feel like we might have almost.
Hmm.
Yes. I think maybe let's get started.
Shall we start? This is amazing.
I'm sorry, I'm just gonna periodically be waving at people.
I know. I was just saying to Kate when we first logged on that I've had much more experience with Zoom memes. This is my first actual Zoom, so I'm pretty awestruck by this whole.
We'll try not to turn ourselves into potatoes.
Yeah, potato heads. Katie, shall we kick off? Are you ready?
I'm ready. Yes.
Okay. Everyone.
Wait, you know what? I will let me introduce you first. Because I mean, this is how we're going to run things. Holly's going to ask me questions in a moment, but first, let me introduce you to Holly, who has so kindly and generously agreed to host this evening. Holly Ringland is the author of the international bestseller, The Lost Flowers of Alice Hart. And she is currently working in a red and white caravan on her second novel, which is called The Seven Skins of Esther Wilding. And she is also going to be co-host on a beautiful ABC nature program called Back to Nature. And those are just the highlights. She has many other strings to her bow. But she and I became dear friends because basically her first book came out in Australia on the same day with the same publisher as my first book. And we read each other's books and kind of fell in love with each other that way, and we've been close ever since. And I thought she was the perfect person to do this event with me because she's currently living with her mum in Australia unexpectedly, and she has 5 dogs there. But also because I sent her many messages throughout the writing of this dog book, so she's been quite privy to the process of it, and she's also a dear friend. So over to you, Holly.
Oh, it was a privilege, honey. Thank you. Everybody, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to have questions. Kate and I are going to chat for a bit, and then we're going to open it up for any questions that any of you have. So if you don't mind holding your questions until the time when I ask for them in about 45 minutes. And I believe that you can ask questions by either waving arms wildly so that we can see that you have one, or there's a little icon with a hand, apparently, to raise your hand to ask a question. Was there any other method, Kate? I'm forgetting to ask a question.
You could also, if you wanted to, write it in the chat. There's a chat that's going around between everyone who's attending. You can write the question in there if you are technologically advanced enough to do so. I don't know that either of my parents would be able to do that. But if you can, go for it.
If all else fails, just hysterically wave. And it's
we'll get to you.
It's going to work that way. Down to business. We are all gathered here tonight to celebrate the launch of, where I've got it open in my lap, this beautiful, beautiful, powerful book that is just being released in Australia, and it's out as an ebook in the UK and the US. Good Dog, written by Kate Lever. I've read it cover to cover. It made me feel so good, and it made me cry. And that's really a wonderful thing at this time, to feel good. So let me introduce you for those of you who don't know who Kate is. And I said to her, I've given her fair warning about this introduction because I don't know if I'll ever get this chance to do it again. So I'm just going to take a couple of moments to introduce this glorious woman. Kate Lever is an Australian journalist, an author, a speaker, and a former professional fairy. As she said, I first met Kate through Twitter because she read my first novel and showered me in her love for it, which made me feel like I was actually the magic fairy. And I learned very quickly that this is who Kate is. She is the person who makes you feel magical in her company or with her words. It's also how her writing makes you feel, which is what we're all here tonight to celebrate. Good Dog. So a little bit of background about Good Dog before we crack in. Kate has previously lived in London with her boyfriend and their good dog, Bertie. She currently lives with them in Sydney, and her resume is blinding. So she's been features editor at Cosmo magazine, senior editor at Mamma Mia. She has written for, and let me just enjoy this, the Sydney Morning Herald, the Australian News.com.au, the Australian Women's Weekly, Stella, Elle Australia, and the Saturday Paper. She currently writes for The Guardian, The Independent, The Telegraph, Glamour, British Vogue. Really hasn't achieved much at all, everyone. She has a weekly column about friendship on Metro, and she is a regular contributor to Future Women. Here is the knee buckler. I love this one. When Kate first moved to the UK, while the rest of us in the world who moved to the UK from Australia go and work in a pub and live above it in a flea-ridden bed we can't afford, Kate was the relaunch editor for J.K. Rowling's Pottermore. As if this is not spectacular enough. This woman also regularly appears on TV and radio. She's been on the BBC, Channel 4, ABC, Triple J, The Today Show. It goes on and on. Her first book, The Friendship Cure, came out in 2018 in Australia, New Zealand, North America, and the UK. It is a book that Good Dog now joins as writing that is medicinal for our minds and our souls. Good Dog is a hymn to the healing role that dogs can play in our lives. It is celebratory, joyous, and moving. Kate, what a joy it is to be here with you, and hopefully with that furry little pocket of magic that we all love. Do we have a cameo?
Okay. Hold on, I'll just get him. He's okay. Come here. He's just coming. Come here.
He takes his time. Bert doesn't simply just perform. Here he is.
Here's Bert. He's got a little bow tie on.
Bert, you were worth the wait. Katie, can you please introduce us to this very handsome fellow?
So this is Bert. When we got him from Battersea in London, he was called Mungo. But you know what? New life, new name. I briefly campaigned for Harry after Harry Styles and Harry Potter, who are two of the most important men in my life. But ultimately we landed on Bert or Bertie. But when he's feeling fancy, he's Gilbert. Sometimes when we're in a mood, he's Albert or Herbert or Bertrand. So he goes by many names. And just the other day, we went on breakfast television. We went on the Today Show in Australia. And to my delight, the headline that they put on the footage was World's Best Boy. So I agree with them. He is, in fact, world's best boy. And you'll hear more about why later, I suspect. He's almost 3. He's a Shih Tzu, but probably not full Shih Tzu. We think there might be a bit of something else in there. And as I say, we adopted him when he was about 9 months old from somewhere called Battersea, just outside of London. And I get in a lot of trouble if I call him my firstborn son, but he's just as important.
There are a lot of people that understand that.
Yeah, exactly. So this is Bert. I might not keep him on my lap throughout the whole thing because he likes to sort of, spread out and really get into a comfortable napping position. But his facial expression says enough. Yeah, exactly. I might put him on the floor for now, but I'll bring him back, don't worry. And one of the questions at the end can be, can we see more Bert?
Great. I'll ask that one. I will ask that one. Shall we kick off? Would you like to read something for us? Give us a short review of the Good Dog.
I'm going to do, it's actually surprisingly difficult to choose an extract to read. So I've chosen 2 small extracts. There's already plenty about me and Bert kind of out in various articles. So I've chosen one of my other favourite dogs. They're all my favourite. Whenever someone asks me to choose a favourite dog, I get very upset because it's impossible because they're all glorious. And that reminds me, actually, there are a couple of people from the book tuning in right now via Zoom. So my very special hello to them and thank you for coming because it meant the world to me to be able to share your story. Today I'm going to read 2 small extracts from chapter 10, which is about Teddy. And the chapter title is a bit of a spoiler alert, to be honest, but I think that's okay. So it's called Teddy, the dog who woke his owner from a coma. I'm going to read you a little extract about Teddy's human being, who is 65-year-old Andy, who lives in Southampton in the UK. I'm going to read a little moment of when he first met his dog Teddy, and then I'll read you the moment when he does that remarkable thing of waking up his owner. So I won't keep you long, but this is just a little taster of what the book is like. So we sit, steaming mugs in hands, and Andy tells me how Teddy came into his life, and he into Ted's. It was 6.5 years ago, just about, and Andy was not meant to get a dog. He and his then wife had always had Jack Russell Terriers, 4 of them in a row, one waddling into their lives after the other. Some time after the last Jack Russell had passed away, the sister of one of Andy's son's girlfriends was working in an RSPCA shelter, and knowing how partial Andy is to some dog company, she invited him to come and visit her. He did, though he promised his wife he wasn't going to bring home another dog. But then, you see, when he got there, he met Ted. Teddy, who wasn't called Teddy at the time, took an instant liking to Andy. He chose Andy. In that magical way a pup in a rescue shelter sometimes decides on their human companion. Andy didn't really have much say in the matter, truth be told. Who was he to refuse the affections of a very well-behaved schnoodle? Teddy was just 16 weeks old back then, a little hiccup of a creature, all scraggly and shaggy and warm. He put his wet nose up against Andy's shin, and to be honest, that's probably all it took to ensnare Andy. We are simple people, dog people. It doesn't take much for us to fall in love with a pup. Teddy had been abandoned by his previous family, allegedly because one of them was allergic, but Andy is skeptical about that story because with their combination of hair and wool, schnoodles tend not to have the type of fur that causes allergic reactions. Rather, Andy is more inclined to believe that Ted was rambunctious, as pups can be, and the humans got overwhelmed, as they can do. Anyway, somehow, accidentally, breaking all those sincerely doled out promises, Andy opened his wallet, paid the adoption fee of £140 and took that handful of puppy home with him. He was named Teddy and he immediately became a member of the family. It's important to state for the record that even then, according to Andy, Teddy was primarily his dog. Ever since that first snuffle against Andy's calves, he and Teddy have been as close as can be. I'm just going to skip forward a few pages to get to the real sort of showstopper scene when he does that remarkable thing I told you about earlier. So basically, first of all, Andy has really been in the wars. He got bowel cancer and then he went to visit his mom in America and came back and got a cold that developed into pneumonia, and his doctors put him into a medically induced coma. They were obviously hoping he would come out of that coma, but he was not responsive. So that's when Teddy comes in. So while Andy was unconscious, his family would come and go. They'd play games at his bedside to pass the time, all the while including him in the conversation. Andy shows me a photograph of him, very much still in a coma, with a hand of cards placed carefully in his outstretched palms so it looked like he was joining in a game of gin rummy. During her visits, Andy's then wife noticed someone walking a dog around the hospital ward. Southampton General Hospital has a therapy dog program, and knowing how much Andy loves dogs, she asked if the resident pup could come for a visit. Andy didn't notice the dog's presence, but it gave his wife an idea. She asked the head nurse if she could please bring Teddy in for a visit, even though he technically wasn't supposed to be in the hospital. The nurse agreed because, like most nurses, she is one of the best sorts of human beings possible. Andy's wife went home and got Ted. She smuggled him into the hospital, concealing him in a giant plastic supermarket bag. As soon as Ted saw Andy, he bounded up onto his bed and licked his face, as he always does. He barked just the once, as if to say, "Hey, pay me some attention, old man." Then something pretty remarkable happened. Andy woke up. The feeling of Teddy's rough tongue on his cheek and the sound of that solitary bark was enough to bring Andy back to waking life. Teddy, for his part, went mad with happiness. He wagged his tail, he jumped around, he celebrated the return of his favourite person. The nurses and doctors could not believe it. Nobody could. It was almost beyond belief. Andy had come out of the coma days earlier than he was meant to, all because his four-legged mate came to visit. I'll leave it there for now, but that's the story of Teddy and Andy.
If we were all in a room together, we would be doing this!
He's clapping, thank you. I'm going to have a sip of my margarita because this is.
I'm going to have a sip of my gin and tonic. Mama Lever is having a sip of her champagne.
I can see Mom's got some champagne. This is good. I've got this. I can see other people in other time zones have cups.
Perfect. I love it.
Whatever you need.
That's such a powerful and beautiful example to share with everybody who might be new to the book about what kind of reading experience you can expect to have between the covers, because it's non-fiction and all of the stories are true stories that you have gone out and learned for yourself about how dogs have healed and changed their humans' lives.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit about where the kernel and the passion to write about this, what was the impetus? Where did this come from?
Well, to be honest, I wrote my first book about friendship a couple of years ago, and then I basically spent 2 years talking about the topic of friendship. So when I was trying to think of a second book idea, my boyfriend said to me, well, you'd better choose something that you're comfortable talking about for a long time afterwards. And then I must have been cuddling Bert at the time, and he said, what about Bert? And I kind of laughed because it seems ridiculous to write an entire book about the dog that you have in your arms. But then I got kind of serious about it and realized that there might be actually legs to that idea, so to speak. And, you know, I stopped short of indulging myself and doing the full 60,000 words about Bert. Instead, I've got a rather lengthy chapter at the beginning about Bert and some other mentions sprinkled throughout. But then I basically went on an expedition to find 10 other extraordinary stories of people whose dogs had changed and indeed sometimes saved their lives. And I reached out to charities and organizations. I put call outs on Twitter and social media. And I took quite a long time to put together a series of really remarkable stories. But I guess I had quite an extensive criteria for that. I wanted them to be moving and remarkable, and I wanted the people to be extraordinary, but I also wanted there to be a little bit of science and research to back me up on why this particular type of dog was so effective for this particular person. So for instance, I met a teenage girl called Katie who trained her border collie puppy called Pip to be a diabetic alert dog. So Pip now wakes Katie's parents up during the night if Katie's blood sugar goes too high or too low. And her parents say her dog saves her life once a week. There's plenty of research and plenty of science to back up why dogs can be so effective at smelling something like diabetes. And in fact, at the moment, they're trialing programs to see whether dogs can smell the coronavirus. So I wanted to be able to get in some really good substantial research into the chapter as well. So each chapter you kind of hear the lovely heartwarming story of how this dog changed someone's life, and then you get a bit of kind of research to back it up to explain why we have such an extraordinary relationship with our dogs.
I really love the way that you do that in the book, may I just say.
Thank you.
We do get the hugely heartwarming, I just kind of wept with joy and love and just being moved the whole way through the book, but it's anchored, it doesn't turn dry when you start talking to us about the research and the science that backs this up. You give us a different narrative, and also hope and faith in humanity, that in the world there are people that study and put their resources into studying how humans make the experience, how dogs make the experience of being human so much more than if we are without them. I love the way the research does that in the book. It doesn't ever feel separate. I love that so much. It's just one big wonderful, and it's so heartening to, like I said, it's so heartening to read it and realize that there are people working every day in researching how dogs help and change us.
Yeah, it's pretty extraordinary.
Yeah.
It's a very delightful book to research, to be honest. And I got to travel around and pat all these wonderful dogs and meet all these remarkable people.
I remember when we used to be texting, when you would text me when you were out on a journey to meet a dog, and I crumbled just hearing the stories about the dog that you'd met that day in the text, and to read about them is beautiful. Yeah. Can you tell us about because this is something you would love talking about, because it comes from your love of dogs, and I know it comes from your love of Bertie, can you share with us how Bertie has changed your life?
Yeah, of course. So that's obviously, getting a book deal was my excuse to write about how wonderful my own dog is. And I truly believe he's a very special little guy. My favorite saying about dogs is that every dog owner believes that their dog is the best dog in the world, and we are all correct. But Bertie, so as I said, he's about 3. He's a Shih Tzu. Basically, the way he changes my life is we've had him for about 2 years. And in that period since we adopted him, I had a pretty hectic depressive episode. I live with bipolar disorder, and though I have the manic episodes very much under control, I still sometimes slip into depression from time to time, despite being delightfully medicated. So basically there was a glitch in the medical system in London that meant I couldn't access the certain medication I was on. And during that time of being off that medication and transferring to a different medication, I just sort of was listless and not able to participate in my own life. And it was a sadness that kind of held me in its grasp, but didn't touch my heart, if that makes any sense. I was kind of numb, painfully numb, for a number of weeks that stretched on, and something we can probably all relate to now, time seemed to lose its meaning. But during that time, basically Bertie refused to leave my side. I think he can smell my depression, or at least tell that something is wrong. And what he does is he comes and lies across my chest with his head in the curve of my neck, which is funny because that's actually what they train therapy dogs to do in order to stop someone having a panic or an anxiety attack. And I don't know how many of you have laid down with a small to medium-sized dog lying on the part of your body that you require to breathe, but it's very strangely comforting. And there's something about being able to feel his little heartbeat against my heartbeat that just reminded me of why I wanted to stay alive. And I truly do believe he knows that something's wrong when I'm sad or depressed or anxious. And as I say, my theory is that he can smell depression. So I got in touch with a man called Stanley Coren, who's one of the leading canine behavioralists in the world. And he basically said, I'm not mad, and it's quite a good theory. And it's entirely possible that Bert can smell my depression. And if that's not accurate, he can at least sense that there's something wrong, and his best effort to help comfort me is simply to offer himself as a comfort, as a safety blanket, and be as physically close to me as possible. So that's what he does. And he would just stay by me all day long. My boyfriend would take the weeknight and the weekend shifts of looking after me, and I have to say, he's sitting just over there. I have to say he has the most remarkable care and love for me, and it's one of the great reasons I am very grateful to have him in my life. But he has professional obligations, whereas Bertie has no professional obligations. So he can just stay and be my nurse and be my companion at all times of the day and night. And that's what he did. And I think it really, truly helped me get through a very difficult period in my life. And I've noticed again, since we've all been, staying at home because of the coronavirus, how extraordinarily supportive and wonderful he's been throughout this very strange time. And I find myself getting very anxious in the evenings, just kind of about the state of the world and the mortality of the people that I love. And having his little wet nose come and, sneak into my neck, and having him kind of snore into my ear as he falls asleep on me is just the most tremendous comfort. And I know that anyone who has a dog or has loved a dog in their lives knows what I'm talking about. So that's really, how he changed my life. Plus he makes me laugh every day, and also he requires outside time. So where my usual instinct might be to hibernate, he makes me go outside every day for a walk in the park, which gets me that kind of nature therapy of fresh air and, being able to see trees and stuff. So that's really the massive change.
That's the thing. Humans are so complex and so simple. We're really, really good at doing things for the people that we love, and or the beings that we love Like, we can't take ourselves outside for a walk, but if we've got a dog sitting and looking at us, out we go to take them for a walk so that they can get their exercise. You know, when we're maybe not in the greatest self-compassion place, outside walks ourselves might not rate, but going out for our dogs do.
Exactly.
I love the part in Good Dog where you often talk about how our brains respond to being with dogs, and threaded through all of these 10 stories and your own experiences with Bert, it's the effect that the compassion and love of a dog has on our health and on the function of our brain, the different parts that produce oxytocin and the lowering in cortisol, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And reading this book at this time, and I liken it to when I've read before that if we can't get out in nature, but we watch a nature documentary, we have physical symptoms that are akin to actually being out in it because our senses are provoked by just watching nature on TV. Reading this book at this time, that's the closest way I can describe to how it felt to read it, which was as if a dog was sitting on me and was giving me that sense of companionship and restored faith in the goodness in people. Because one of the greatest messages I think that comes through the 10 incredible stories is that dogs bring out courage that we think we don't have.
Yeah.
Goodness that we forget that we have, and love that gives us a real reason to live our lives more fully, even in the most adverse circumstances. What was that like for you, interviewing the extraordinary people that you have spoken to who have shared stories with you for Good Dog? What was that like to sit with them and to hear how their lives were? Because there's such a marriage of darkness and light in Good Dog. It's so beautiful. What was that experience like for you, the interviewing process and meeting the dogs and their humans and then putting it all together?
Look, I would probably describe it as one of the great privileges of my life, being able to speak to the people that I spoke to for this book. Some of them, I can see their faces right now. I mean, I think... yeah, I mean, I got to spend many months just going around to various places in the world where I found these extraordinary people. And for instance, I can see Vanessa's face with her dog.
It's so nice to see Nessa.
Vanessa and her dog, who has a very fancy name. He began life being called Jack, but he has since been knighted and he's now Sir Jack Spraticus. And I went to her apartment, which was a few hours away from where I was living in London at the time by train. And her apartment is just this sanctuary of there's not a vacant space on her wall for all the pictures of Jack that there are. And she's got fairy lights around the kitchen, and little positive quotes hung on the wall. And it's just a sanctuary of love. And that's where she lives with Sir Jack. And being welcomed into her life, Vanessa lives with complex post-traumatic stress disorder, and a number of other mental health issues that you can read more about in the book. And she lives a difficult life, and I was beyond touched to be invited into that life for just a moment, to be able to see for myself and to understand what a remarkable difference one animal can make to a human being. So her dog is technically her support dog, and it means he gets a cute little harness to wear. And in order to qualify as a mental health support dog, which means he can go with her wherever he likes, he has to be able to do 3 things that help her. And I saw him be able to fetch the landline phone if she needs it in an emergency, can find and fetch her medication wherever it is in the apartment. And I saw him do it, and it was very impressive. And he can also calm her during a panic or anxiety attack, which he does either by standing between her feet or, as I say, sort of lying on her body to calm her down. And it's essentially changed her life and given her a reason to live. And he had a pretty rough start in life as well. And let me tell you, he is tremendously lucky to be able to go on long countryside and beach walks with Vanessa and come home and have a snuggle and a treat. He has several beds in the apartment. He lives a very good life. And I just think, you know, that experience happened 10 times over. I can also see Geraldine, who is in Northern Ireland, who runs an amazing organisation called Assistance Dogs Northern Ireland, and she hooked me up with 2 of the chapters. One called Jingles, who works in a medium security prison in Northern Ireland, and one called Echo, and I believe Echo's mum might also be here, Aideen. I saw her before. And Aideen is a school teacher at a special needs school, and she takes Echo in every day, and Echo helps children learn to read. But when I met Geraldine in Northern Ireland, she not only, you know, gave me the contact details of people to speak to for interviews, she actually insisted I stay in her home, and she drive me between the prison and her home. So just the most remarkable hospitality and kindness and generosity of spirit that I feel like I can't properly repay. And I'm just so grateful for, and also it was just such a pleasure to get to know these people and to have them in my life, and to really make the case for why dogs are so wonderful. Because I know dogs are wonderful. Every dog person knows how wonderful dogs are, but I want everyone to know it, and I want them to recognize it, and I want them to let dogs into supermarkets and libraries and wherever we want to go with them. So that's my real agenda.
Agreed.
Yeah, it was just a pleasure, basically.
Full confession for everyone watching, I basically stalked Kate as I read Good Dog. I texted her every page.
I loved it.
I tried to be cool and breezy about it. I tried to just read it on my own, deal with my emotions on my own. And as I said, as we said earlier, I'm a dog person. There are 5 outside. I would let them in, but this would become an entirely different Zoom if I did that. So you don't have to convince me at all. But even with 5 dogs outside, even knowing how a dog changes a life, reading Good Dog brings me home also to. There is something about the connection that we have with animals, dogs in particular, that remind us what we are capable of, because they give us love that we've maybe never had before in our life in the certain way that they do. Having the privilege and the honour to be able to read stories like Nessa's. And I can see Liz is here as well.
Yes, Liz is here. I saw Liz today.
Oh my God, being able to read Liz's story and how dogs have brought everybody into a better experience of living their story. It's something that we feel as a reader like we are with you the whole time that you're going to visit everyone. And I feel a little bit flushed and fangirly seeing people like Liz and Nessa here, because I feel a little bit like I'm, you know, and their pups in the presence of stars. And that's also because, of course, of, you know, how you've written their stories and communicated that on the page. How do you feel having written the book and now the book is out there? Has there been, with you being a dog person as you are, has there been any sort of act of transformation or bringing anything home to you as the writer that this experience has given you, even being a dog person? Was there anything that surprised you that you weren't expecting?
Well, I mean, it's a very strange time to have a book out, to be honest. But also I kind of hope that maybe it might help some people in some funny way, by being the wholesome dog content that they need. But since the book has been out, I've basically had if my thesis statement was that dogs are wonderful and we should be grateful to have them in our lives, I've had that reinforced already so much in the 1 week that this book has been out. I've already started to, because I've had a few media appearances, I've already started to get messages on social media through my Instagram direct messages and on Facebook and on Twitter, from people who, I think it's a very natural response when you read other people's stories. Sometimes you're desperate to tell your own. So I've already had people get in touch to say like, me, I have a Shih Tzu. I have a Shih Tzu called Daisy and she changed my life. That happened yesterday. A gentleman called Luke got in touch with me via, actually not even my Instagram. He came through Bert's Instagram, which
Bert does have an Instagram.
he
Yes.
does, technically a micro influencer because he has more than 1,000 followers, and it's at Little Bertie the dog if you don't already follow him. But yeah, so I'm already starting to get those beautiful personal messages from people who have had their lives changed by dogs. And who, most of whom are at home, all of whom hopefully are at home at the moment, just lavishing their dog with extra attention and love because they have to stay indoors. So I guess I haven't been surprised by the response yet, because I knew this would happen. I knew as soon as I put a book out saying how good dogs were, I knew I would have strangers come to me and people in my life who I've always known who have dogs who would say, yes, I hear you and I see you and I know how important dogs are. Here is my story. So it's a joy to me to be able to kind of collect those stories as further proof of how wonderful these creatures can be.
For good dog too.
For good dog too, yeah.
Good dog too. Kate, could I talk with you more broadly now about writing, if you feel like it? So, as we know, you're a journalist, a freelance writer, and an author, narrative non-fiction. And we've talked a little bit about your last book was The Friendship Cure, which is all about, the title is the tin doing what it says. It's about friendship curing us in this age of loneliness, in the digital age of loneliness. And it's one of my non-fiction favourites that I regularly take to the bath with myself to make myself feel calmer about the world. And one of the things I love so much about anything I read of yours, whether it's one of your freelance articles, The Friendship Cure, and now with The Good Dog, and I've tried to articulate this to you before, is the spell that you cast on the reader, because your writing feels so easy to read. There is a beautiful ease. You forget that you're reading. It's like when you watch a performance and you forget that it's an actor reciting lines. You forget that someone has sat at a keyboard and bled to write, because, at the end of it all, it is still the writing process. It doesn't just fall out of your brain onto the page. So one of the greatest tricks, I think, is when a reader, if a reader says, oh my God, it was so amazing, I read it in a day, and it's been 2 years of your life, Yeah. So I wanted to ask you in a more broad way about your writing experience. It's so beautifully easy to read in terms of not simple, like I said, there are stories in here that ripped my guts out and, I had a little sob as I was reading, but such a beautiful ease to read. Does it feel beautifully easy to write?
Not always. This time around was a lot easier than the first time I wrote a book. First time I wrote a book, I had a bit of a depressive episode then too, and it was pretty rough to try and write 80,000 words through that. But so this time has been comparatively a breeze because I have been chemically very stable, which has been delightful and partly to do with having Bert and Jono in my life. But no, it's not always easy. We actually, this sounds like such a glamorous thing to drop in, but my boyfriend was working in Monet's garden in the French countryside for a month.
Drop it in.
Yeah. So I gate crashed his trip and spent a month in the French countryside writing about a quarter of a third of this book. And I distinctly remember throwing my notes on the floor and having a bit of a tantrum in front of Jono and him advising me to just put on my sneakers and go for a grumpy walk, because I can't remember what part of the book it was, but I couldn't solve something. There was just a segue that I couldn't get, and I couldn't work out the structure of the chapter that I wanted to work. And I was so mad, and I just had a really cranky walk into some woods in the French countryside and took some deep breaths and came back and felt a little bit more able to construct a sentence. And I had many of those tantrums throughout the writing of this book, I have to be honest. And sometimes you just can't, sometimes there's a science to writing that you can't get. And then other days, miraculously, for no reason, it works. I remember texting you, Holly, because I had been unable to write for a few days. And then I just sat down at my desk and I wrote 4,000 words.
I remember that day.
And that was most of the chapter that I read for you guys earlier about Teddy and Andy. And he was my first interview that I did. And for some reason, I don't know why, I don't know what I did differently that day, but I just woke up ready and able to write that day. And I think writing, at least in my experiences, is a little bit like that. That's why when I write, I never set myself a daily word count, because I would never make it, because some days I have those cranky days and it just is not working, and I need to read or walk or watch reruns of Friends until I feel alive again. So I sort of generally work to more of a weekly word count goal. And I didn't always make that, but then other days I would, you know, overcompensate. So no, it wasn't always easy. It was almost always a joy. I enjoyed writing this book. But yeah, there were some difficult moments, because I think writing is difficult, and really the only difference between writers and non-writers, there's no magic to it. The answer of how you write a book is that you just like grapple your way through those difficult moments, and you put your bottom on a chair and you produce the words. And that's really all there is to it. And that's just, I guess, it's more to do with the fact that I was able to locate some kind of tenacity and less to do with a natural ease of writing. I don't, if that answers your question.
Yeah,